A former government minister facing jail after tweeting a Bible verse says her trial, which starts tomorrow, will be a test of religious freedom. Päivi Räsänen, a medical doctor, mother of 5 and a grandmother of 7, is accused of having engaged in hate speech for publicly voicing her opinion on marriage and human sexuality on 3 occasions. First in a 2004 pamphlet, then on a 2019 radio show, and then in a tweet directed at her church leadership. The tweet questioned its official sponsorship of the LGBT event Pride 2019, quoting a Bible passage from the book of Romans. According to ADF International, Räsänen could face up to 2 years in jail. Paul Coleman, a British solicitor and executive director of the legal advocacy organisation ADF International, who is supporting the case, joins me now. Paul, thanks very much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
Paul, can you just give us bring us up to date on this issue? A lot of people over here won't have heard of this case, but it sounds quite extreme. Can you give us a summary?
It is extreme, and it's one of those cases where you think, okay, there's got to be more to this. You know, it can't really be as you just outlined it, but it really is as you outlined it. Päivi Räsänen is a long-standing member of Parliament. She's been in Parliament for over 25 years. She's also a member of the state church here in Finland, the Evangelical Lutheran Church. And when her church decided to sponsor the Pride Parade, become its official partner, she questioned this decision, essentially asking how the decision aligned with her understanding of what the Bible taught on the issue. And so she tweeted a picture of some Bible verses, questioned her church's leadership, thought nothing much more of it, and then the police contacted her and said they were investigating her for committing a alleged offence of what we call hate speech. Under the Finnish law, it's called ethnic agitation. And then it spiraled out of control even more than that, because she's been in public office for over a quarter of a century, and evidently the general prosecutor and the apparatus of the state went looking for anything else they could find, and they dug out this pamphlet she wrote for her church almost 20 years ago. They took a couple minutes of a debate that she'd been on from a 1-hour debate, extracted 2 minutes out of context and picked on that as well. And they added all of these things together, and then they charged her with hate speech. And the bishop who published this booklet in 2004 is also facing trial tomorrow as well.
So can I ask about this, Paul? Because I find this very, very confusing. I've read a lot of the accounts of this. They talk about a quotation from the book of Romans. I think I know which quotation it is. They never seem to quote it, but I think it's about the one about men burning in lust for other men. I'm sure that's the quote, or I assume it is. But she's quoting the Bible to a church, and then she has a complaint. But isn't that the church's own book? Surely they should support that, shouldn't they?
You would think so, but they chose instead to support the Pride Parade, and it was her play on words, really talking about, okay, on the one hand, the church refers to this as sin, and her church is referring to it as pride. And it was that sort of play on words that led to this investigation. What's interesting is the police have been investigating this for over 2 years and began in the summer of 2019. So she's been to the police station on numerous occasions. She's been interrogated for hours, and the police themselves have then been asking her about her theological beliefs. What do you think the Apostle Paul meant by these words? What do you think the book of Genesis means? And so she's actually been in the police station interrogated about her theology.
I mean, I'm absolutely baffled by this. You know, I'm a gay Catholic myself. There's a lot of us, plenty in the clergy, as it happens. But you know, this idea that the Bible in of itself is a hate text, according to the, you know, I am fully aware of what the Catechism says. I'm fully aware of what the Catholic Church doctrine on this matter is. And who is this for? Like, the idea if someone says something about my life that is offensive to me, that I would want that person prosecuted, is a nonsense. How patronising. I can listen to these things and not get upset. Who is this supposed to be protecting?
Well, indeed. And one of the crazy things about so many of these sort of hate speech laws and cases is there aren't any victims here. So her tweet, it didn't even violate Twitter's own policies, which, as you know, are pretty broad. And so it's still freely available. Anyone can look it up. And underneath, you can see various, as you'd imagine, comments, people, different views, some supportive, others against, and just what you'd imagine you'd normally find on Twitter. But there isn't really any victim here. And in fact, this case will take place tomorrow. The whole thing will be heard in a day. 3 criminal complaints against her, 1 against the bishop. And the reason for that is because there isn't really any witnesses here. There isn't really any dispute of the facts. We're not going to be hearing person after person whose life has been ruined by reading this tweet. It's all theoretical. It's all abstract. So the general prosecutor, on behalf of whomever, decides that this is offensive in the abstract, and that is enough under Finnish law, and in fact under law across many countries in Europe, to launch this prosecution.
Is this a particular problem with Finland? I mean, I know that you've done a lot of very, very important work in terms of compiling the various hate speech laws across Europe. Your book, Censored, does exactly this, which is a book that I would highly recommend to people, because you literally compile the text of the various hate speech laws. And you can see, I mean, I'm very familiar with the book. I'm looking through the book, seeing the various texts. They're very different. No one seems to know what hate speech is. No one can agree on a definition because it is so nebulous. The very concept of hate is so nebulous. Is it the case that in Finland this is a particular problem there? Or is it that this case is going to set a precedent and make it even worse? What's happening over there?
Well, I mean, part of the scary thing about what's happening in Finland is it really could happen anywhere else. And it's been very shocking for people in Finland that this case is going forward. And there's nothing particularly unusual or different about the formulation of the Finnish law. But as you say, these laws are nebulous, they're incredibly vague, subjective, and as a result of that, they can be enforced arbitrarily, which means at any given moment, if you have the right police, the right prosecutor, you can, and if you have a quarter of a century of speech to comb through to find something, then you can make a case out of pretty much anything. And that applies across the entire continent. And so while this case won't set an immediate precedent in a legal sense, it's not like the courts in Madrid or Paris will be following it later this year. If Päivi and Bishop Juhana Pajola, if they're convicted of hate speech here, then I think it will set a new European low bar for free speech standards.
Well, it will mean effectively that quoting the Bible is a criminal offence, which is a bizarre thing to contemplate. And when I talk to Americans about this, as I often do, they are baffled by this because, of course, they have their First Amendment. So can I just ask you as a final question, do you think there is any possibility of hate speech laws in the UK, which are enshrined at the moment in the Communications Act and the Public Order Act, that those will ever be repealed? Because I don't see much of an appetite for politicians. I don't see many of them standing up in Parliament saying, we've got to get rid of these. This is enough. And the SNP, as you know, are out of control when it comes to this stuff. What are the chances that we'll be able to move beyond this, get this stuff off the statute books? Is it likely?
Well, there has been one positive thing that's happened in our lifetimes, which is that the word insulting was removed from the law in the UK. And in fact, that word insulting is probably going to be the word in the Finnish law that Päivi, that the case is centering around, because it's even more vague than these other words. And so that was a good move. But unfortunately, apart from that, as I think, speak about often, things are trending in a more negative direction in the UK, and everything seems to be moving more and more in terms of more censorship. And you look at the various bills that are being discussed in Parliament at the moment, and all of the free speech concerns connected to them. And rather than the appetite being towards defending and protecting and upholding freedom of expression, the message that we receive from those in power is we're going to have a better society if we can just censor more speech.
Paul Coleman, thanks very much for joining me.